Ernie and I would like to give you a little information about VBS this year. It's called Focus, and registration deadline is actually today. He's so excited, he can't wait. So if you are interested in VBS, please make sure you register today for it. It happens from June 21st through the 25th. So very soon, but make sure that you take care of that today. You can register by going to jeffcitychurch.com, and it's for all kids from ages 2 all the way through those who are getting ready to start 6th grade. So maybe a little different than what you're accustomed to, because it'll be mostly online, unless the people involved end up having a little more confidence about being able to be around each other. But we hope it'll still be a fun and uplifting experience for your children. So jeffcitychurch.com, visit there to get all the details. Remember, the deadline is today. If you're part of youth, we hope you'll join us for Wacky Wednesday, starting June 24th and going all the way through July 22nd. Each Wednesday night from 5 to 8. There'll be some competitive team games where points will accrue over those 4 weeks around such things as Yuck Night or Water Night or sports or even trivia. You can even get points for bringing friends. So we hope you'll join us Wednesday nights from 5 to 8. Food will be provided. If you do plan on eating, we ask that you bring $2 to help with the cost for that. Many folks in our church are now looking forward to coming back in person and being part of a worship service actually live, not through the wonders of YouTube. So if you're in that situation, we are asking that you please try and register before that happens so we know that you're coming. It's not mandatory. We're still going to let you in if you don't do that. And if you're a visitor or didn't know that was something that we were asking, once again, we're totally fine with you being there on the spur of the moment. However, the more people that do register, the easier it is for us to plan how that worship service will go. So we'll know how many we can expect, and we can plan out spacing things, we can clean, and we can also make sure we have enough communion set up for you. So if it's possible for you to do that, we really appreciate that. It's an easy process. Simply go to jeffcitychurch.com. There's a simple form there to let us know that you're coming, how many are in your party, which service you're going to be attending. During this time of isolation, we've really been stressing the importance of connecting with folks in real and meaningful ways, even though you can't do that in person. And so we've really pushed the idea of joining a team where you can connect with people each week in ways that might be helpful to you. It's something that we hope will continue even when conditions lighten and we're able to do more and more in person. So if you're interested in joining a team or creating one but aren't really sure about how, simply go to jeffcitychurch.com and click on Connect. And there's information there that can help you get through that process. There are also all kinds of ideas that we can provide for you, from games to sermon questions to Bible study ideas that you can have at your fingertips to be a part of what you use. If you're a senior adult, there already is a group in place that you can be a part of. So if you would email bob@jeffcitychurch.com, he can connect you to that Zoom group that meets on Wednesday evenings each week, and quickly you can become part of that community. If you've been in our lobby lately, you may have noticed some new collection boxes. They're for an organization called Mobile Lifehouse. That's a group that we're using to help us reach the hungry people in this community. So the next time you're grocery shopping, pick up a few extra items and put them in that collection box, and we'll make sure they get to folks who can really use them.
can stop the Lord Almighty? Who 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 can stop the Lord? Our God is the Lion of Judah. He's roaring with power and fighting our battles. Every knee will bow before Him. Our God is the Lamb that was slain for the sins of the world. His blood breaks the chains. Every knee will bow before the Lion and the Lamb. Every knee will bow before Him.
I want to get baptized because I'm ready to let everybody know that I want to follow Jesus.
And now that I'm going to be down there kind of by myself, I can have God there instead, and He can be the one, that is there with me.
So I was at church one day praying, and I just told God, I said, God, this is me praying. I'm not going to jump up. I don't want to run up front, and I, want to pray in my own way, and I hope you understand that and know that I'm literally pouring my heart out to you. And so the lady in front of me turns around and says, God told me to tell you that you can pray any way you want to.
The Holy Spirit will always be with you, and that even if I'm not on earth with you, I'm in heaven with you. So I'll always be with you in your heart.
You kind of got to look deep down inside yourself and say, what am I missing? And I think the biggest thing I was missing was having Jesus Christ put first.
I remember that He died on the cross, He went into the stone, and the women went back and was going to put spices on Him, and He was gone, and they were like, oh no, where did they go? He rose from the grave.
Spiritually and mentally and physically, I know that I'm ready to make this commitment and go forward and represent Jesus Christ and what it really means to be baptized.
I'm Julie Ann, and I want to follow Jesus. My name is Kenley Willard, and I want to follow Jesus.
My name is Julia Bounger, and I want to follow Jesus.
My name is Jack Reno, and I want to follow Jesus.
My name is Jack Casey, and I want to follow Jesus.
My name is John, and I want to follow Jesus.
If you don't know Anita, you need to. I have never seen so much personality wrapped up in one young lady before.
Many of you might know Barbara Henson, who cleans our church, but she came up to me in the hallway and she said, hey, I get to fill the tub for Audrey this week.
This is pretty cool. Jack, I want to tell you, I think it's really cool how much you love the Cubs, but I think it's even cooler how much you love Jesus.
May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His presence go before you and behind you and beside you, all around you and within you. He is with you.
I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, for the forgiveness of sin and the gift of the Holy Spirit.
Rising to walk, buried with Christ in baptism, rising to walk in the newness of life.
He is for you, He is for you, He is for you.
Whenever you're ready, introduce yourself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lisa Joseph, and my pivotal circumstance happened when I lived in New York City in 2001. I'd recently moved there, and I was looking for a job, and my roommate at the time, her friend worked at a restaurant called Windows on the World, which was at the top of the World Trade Center. And he, got me in, and I had my interview. I had my second interview and everything, and, I pretty much had the job, and it was just, a matter of me starting, and they showed me where I was gonna sit, where my office was gonna be, and everything like that, and before you know it, they called back and they said they were gonna go with somebody else, and I was so angry at God because this was my dream job, and, it was, hook up, it's who you know, and so I had first interview, second interview, and they showed me everything. I was introduced to people, and then all of a sudden, no job, and I was just so angry at God. And of course, fast forward a few months later, and September 11th happened, and almost nobody made it out of Windows of the World. So I realized that I was spared, and even sometimes when I, act bratty and I pray for something, it doesn't happen, and, the Holy Spirit just reminds me, September 11th, I know what happened. I know what's going to happen, and even though you may not understand, you just have to trust me.
My pivotal circumstance was when I was diagnosed with breast cancer.
My divorce.
After 23 years of marriage, my husband told me he wanted a divorce.
Having a special needs child, my husband and I suffered from infertility for about 5 years.
I lost a son, Joshua, 5 years ago.
Our son Parker was 16 and he had a car accident and died.
When I was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm about a year ago.
Being diagnosed with colon cancer.
Going through my wife's cancer with her.
I was told I had to have open heart surgery immediately.
I've got an X-ray here that shows that lymphoma right underneath my right clavicle.
Was at the end of a 9-month relationship.
The birth of one of our 4 children. She has a diagnosis of having Down syndrome.
One of them in my life happened this summer when I went on a missions trip to Peru.
When my brother got into a car accident when I was 10, and I saw the whole accident happen.
On August 6th, on the way to a meeting, I received a call. And the call went something like this. Due to a strategic reorganization, your services after 10 years are no longer needed.
The manager of the base bank at the base in Lubbock, Texas, gave me a call and said he wanted to take me to lunch. And I'm thinking to myself, why does this guy want to take me to lunch?
And my pivotal circumstance was when I was 19 years old and chose to have an abortion.
And I lost my hair at the age of 30.
My little son did and brought me outside and said, look up in the sky. And up in the sky, there was a plane skywriting, you plus God equals happiness. And it was just directly to me. It was almost like a burning bush moment.
There was a guy who came in my life about 10 years ago and told me about this church.
And all of that was the hand of God that I've seen every day. And God's faithfulness is even seen in my hair coming back.
It was just such a personal time for me to really know who God is.
And what at one point tested my faith has become an item that has strengthened it.
And from that day, I just gave everything up to him and asked him to forgive me.
Knowing that I'll see Joshua again gives us the faith and the courage and the hope to go on.
God has entered in my life in a new way. It wasn't that I didn't believe, but now it was practical and now it was real.
And shortly thereafter, in a church service, I responded to an invitation to Christ and invited Jesus into my life.
That's my story.
That's my story.
That's my pivotal circumstance.
I want to say welcome to everyone this morning, whether you are part of our online community or whether you are on site and you have had to go to one of our overflow rooms or our family room and you are watching the service from there. We are glad that you are with us this morning as we dig into this last part of the series that we have been in called 5 Things That God Uses to Grow Your Faith. Now, on this particular day, as I begin this recording, one of the things that's going on outside my house right now is there's a little bit of a thunderstorm rolling through. And that's really interesting because it kind of goes along with what we're going to be talking about today. And you just saw a glimpse of it, and the testimonies that were given to you in that last video montage of people talking about pivotal circumstances in their lives that God used to grow their faith. And the reason it kind of goes along with the thunderstorm that I'm currently hearing roll through my neighborhood is this: a lot of times, pivotal circumstances come out of painful circumstances. Every once in a while, there's something wonderful that happens. Maybe it is you make a new friend, or you have a child, and something goes on that just is a wonderful thing, and it strengthens your faith. Whether it's through a relationship with a friend or just the experience of having this life in your home and wanting to be a better father or a better mother, your faith is somehow strengthened through that act. And sometimes it's wonderful stuff that become pivotal circumstances in our lives. But more often than not, when you talk to people about their faith, first of all, they'll mention usually one of the 5 things that we have been talking about over the last few weeks. Remember, we've been talking about practical teaching. We have talked about providential relationships. We have talked about private disciplines. Last week, I talked to you about personal ministry. And this week is something that people will often mention. In fact, it may be the one that people mention the most, and it's pivotal circumstances. And like I was saying before, a lot of times those come out of very painful situations. Today, we're going to look at a Bible story that is a pivotal circumstance. In fact, it was looked back upon and remembered, and the story was told, and it was actually written down and put in our scriptures because it was such a pivotal circumstance. But it was born out of a very painful situation. The book that we're going to be reading out of is a book called Ruth, but a lot of the story revolves around a character named Naomi. And we're going to hear about Naomi's story. We're going to read and reflect on how Naomi dealt with a very painful situation in her life and turned it into a pivotal circumstance that strengthened her faith, but also strengthened the faith of many around her. So we're going to actually just jump right into this text today. So I want to encourage you, if you are watching me online, go ahead and hit the pause button and go and find your Bible. Pull out your phone and scroll to the book of Ruth. It's actually really early on in the scriptures in the Old Testament. And we're going to dive into this together. Now, one of the things that I need to kind of give you a glimpse of, even though we're going to be reading very, very early on, we're going to start with verse 3 in chapter 1, something difficult has already happened. Naomi has had to move with her husband Elimelech into a different land. They were from Judah, the Bethlehem area, and they have had to move to the land of Moab. That already indicates that probably not a good thing went on. There was probably something that happened that caused Elimelech, Naomi's husband, to lose his land. So they have had to move to this area, and I want to pick up in Ruth chapter 1, verse 3 with what happened in her life. Now, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. That's Naomi's 2 sons. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Can you imagine? I mean, she has lost her home. She has had to move into a new place. And once they get to that new place, she loses her husband. And seemingly not too far after that, she loses her 2 sons. The reason we know it's probably not too far after that is both Ruth and Orpah are young enough to remarry, young enough to start new families of their own. And here we find Naomi in this tragic, difficult, painful situation. I know there are those of you who are watching this today that you have had to endure, or maybe you are currently enduring your own painful situation, and it may rival Naomi's. But can you imagine being in this woman's place? What she decides she has to do is she decides she has to move back to the area around Bethlehem to see if she can find someone related to her that can help her through this difficult time. She tells the girls, Ruth and Orpah, you guys go back to your home here in Moab and try to start yourself new families, except Ruth is not having it. Ruth says, no, I'm committed to you. What I find interesting about this is it goes along with something we talked about earlier in this series. The very first lesson that we talked about was the lesson of providential relationships, how people come into our lives and they somehow serve to strengthen our faith. And I see this relationship with Ruth and Naomi as a providential relationship. Ruth is not going to let Naomi go, and so she says, okay, let's go, and they make the trip down. They end up arriving in Bethlehem, and I want you to hear what Naomi says when she arrives, when people start to talk to her, because I think it's something that if you've been through a painful circumstance, you could probably relate to. Again, we're reading out of Ruth chapter 1, and I want to start in verse 19. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women exclaimed, can this possibly be Naomi? And then Naomi responds like this. She says, don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me. In these words, I think we see so much of what Naomi is dealing with. One of the things that I came across when I was looking at this story years ago was something that I think kind of made it so crystal clear what Naomi's dealing with, and maybe what a lot of you deal with. There's a therapist, a Christian guy named Henry Cloud, who talks about the 3 P's of grief or of pain when we go through it. The things that kind of go on inside of us when we're trying to interpret what in the world is going on. And I want you guys to hear these, because I think it's what's going on with Naomi, but I also think it's something that you probably can relate to with something that's happened in your life. So when Henry Cloud talks about the 3 P's, he talks about this kind of progression of thoughts that we have when we endure a difficult circumstance. The first one that he talks about is this idea of we make it personal. I have done something to deserve this. Would you just do this with me? Just kind of gonna do that thing where you pat your heart and say, this is personal. This is personal. It's like when there's the breakup, and even though the guy says, I promise it's me, it's not you. This is when you look at them and say, yeah, right, it's me. It's personal. But it may not be just breakups, but it can be lots of things that happen in our lives. And when we interpret them, we say, man, I must have done something to bring this upon myself. The second P that Henry Cloud talks about is the idea of it being pervasive. Do this with your hands. And what this represents is you start to develop this belief that despair, what Naomi calls affliction, is just entangled in every area of your life. It becomes pervasive. So first you take it personally, then it becomes pervasive. And what that means is you say that everything is like this. Going back to our example of the relationship, at first you say, it's not you, it's really, it's me. But then you start to develop this idea in your head when it becomes pervasive that everything in my life is going south. Everything is not good. You might even say every relationship I have is terrible. It becomes a pervasive thought. So first you take it personally, then it becomes pervasive when you think that the bad things are happening in every area of your life. And the last one, do this with me, you believe that it is permanent. And cover your eyes. What I'm symbolizing there with covered eyes is you can't see a future where it's not bad, horrible. Again, as Naomi said, afflicted. I mean, if you think about all the words that she used, first of all, she wanted to change her name. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. That's a representative of her taking it so personally, thinking that there's something wrong with her. And then when she talked about how my life is not full, it is empty, which I look at that and I wonder if Ruth kind of said, wait a second, what am I, chopped liver? Ruth stuck around, but yet Naomi couldn't see it. And I think that kind of has to do with those blinders, because not only was it personal, it was pervasive, and she saw it as permanent. The Lord has afflicted me. And I wonder if there are many of you who have been in that place. And what's awful is so many of us stay in that place for not just months, but it can be years and it can be decades. And what a difficult thing when we don't see the Ruths in our lives, the things that God may be providing to turn that painful circumstance into a pivotal circumstance. I think there's this great quote by Philip Yancey where he says, the only thing worse than disappointment with God, where you're disappointed with God, the only thing worse than disappointment with God is disappointment without God. And the reason is, if you don't have God, if you don't remember that God is with you through the midst of that circumstance, then you stay in that personal, pervasive, permanent place of despair. I want us to be reminded today that the problem of pain, wrestling with God in the midst of hard times, this is not new. People have been doing it for centuries. In fact, the scriptures are full of stories about people wrestling with pain. And the resounding declaration time and time again through the stories that we have is this, and I need you to remember this: pain is not evidence of God's absence. It is a spotlight for his faithfulness. I'm going to read that again, and I want you to say it out loud. Pain is not evidence of God's absence. It is a spotlight for his faithfulness. There's another quote that I would share with you. It's a quote from C.S. Lewis that reads, "Pain insists upon being attended to. God whispers to us in our pleasures. He speaks in our consciences, but he shouts in our pains. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world." Believe it or not, pain can be an unbelievable time to realize how faithful and how powerful God is. He can take painful circumstances and make them pivotal circumstances that actually strengthen us in the long run. Pain certainly brings us to our knees, but I want you to hear this. When the crying calms, when the questions cease, usually what happens is our ears open and our hearts stand at the ready for the faithful healing hand of God. So the question is, where do we start? How do we start to take steps toward making our painful situation a pivotal circumstance? Well, it starts with what I would call a switch. It starts with something in your thinking that changes. Now, it might be a difficult thing for you to wrap your mind around, so what I want to do is I want to get somebody to help me give you an example. So I've got a few friends together, and they're going to do a little something to help us understand the fundamental switch that has to happen to start us on the road to seeing our painful situation as a pivotal circumstance. Hey everybody, since our on-site services involve people of all different ages, I thought I would get me some people of all different ages to help us out with this illustration. So I have got some family and a friend. I've got Audrey, my daughter, and her buddy Julia. We're not social distancing from Julia because she's been in our quarantine bubble for the last few weeks. We think she's germ-free, so we're good with that. I've also got a couple other people up the hill that maybe you can see. I got my son Jack and my son Will. And this is the game we're gonna play. Audrey has the hard part. Audrey has got to get that ball up the hill. She got to bounce 3 times on the trampoline, and then she's got to get back down this hill while Julia runs the stopwatch. And that's how we're gonna play it this first time, and then we'll switch it up just a little bit. So, are you guys ready? All right. I'm actually gonna switch the perspective around. Just kidding, no I'm not, because you can't do it while it's recording. All right, here's what we're gonna do. Are you ready? Julia, are you good on the clock? She's good on the clock. On your mark, get set, go. Whoa! That was a crazy move. And time!
27 seconds and 57 milliseconds.
Woo! 27 and a half is about what we're dealing with. Okay, very nice. Now, we're actually gonna switch up the game. Now, these people up here in the yard, they are not your obstacles. Now you're gonna see them as teammates. And you don't have to hold on to that ball the entire time. So how do you think it might work to get it up and down the hill faster?
I could run part of the way and then throw it to one of the boys while the other one jumps on the trampoline.
Yeah?
Then they could throw it to each other and back to me. I could run it back down.
Let's give it a whirl. You wanna see if it works? All right, fellas.
Do you want me to time this?
We're gonna time this one too. We gotta beat 27 and a half, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
27 and a half is what we're trying to beat. Are we ready? On your mark, get set, go! And time!
17 seconds.
Nice! You smoked it. Almost cut it in half. Now what in the world could that possibly have to do with what we're talking about today? We'll see. So the change in perspective, that the family members are not obstacles, but they are opportunities. It's a change in the way you see things. This is the exact sort of thing that Jesus' brother encourages Christians to do in the midst of painful circumstances. I know our story is in the Old Testament and we're still going to talk a lot about Naomi, but I want to jump over to something that Jesus' brother James wrote because it's so important when it comes to how we interpret, how we see painful circumstances. It's in James chapter 1, and you don't have to turn there, you can just listen to me read it. It's in James chapter 1, verse 2, if you want to look it up later. He writes this: "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds." That makes no sense, right? We don't think of trials as joy, but that's a major switch that James is asking us to do. And he writes this: "Because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete." Will you say those words with me one more time? Mature and complete, not lacking anything. A lot of times when we go through life, our chief aim is just peace, smooth sailing, and happiness. But when it comes to faith, that is not the goal. God's goal for faith is that it becomes mature and complete. And one of the things that God does is when painful circumstances come into our life. Yes, God allows painful circumstances into our lives. And when he does, God can take that and use that to grow you deeper. If we refuse to see it that way, if we see our lives as only being the chief goal of our lives, only being trying to be peaceful and happy, we'll never get there. But we have to make a switch. And if we can start to see one of the chief goals of our life is having a mature and deep faith, well, that's the first step. That is the first step in realizing that a painful situation can actually become a pivotal circumstance. Now, thinking back to Naomi in our story for today, I think at some point in her life, she made that switch. I think at some point in her life, she opened her eyes and saw Ruth still standing there with her. And through that providential relationship, she didn't just see Ruth standing there. She saw God standing there. You see, what she realized is that all along, in the midst of her pain, when she wanted to call herself bitter or Mara, when she wanted to say her life was empty, when she wanted to feel that she was cursed and afflicted, all along, God was standing right there with her. And when she made that switch to see those things, amazing things started to happen. And we'll come back to those after this.
There's a grace when the heart is under fire. Another way when the walls are closing in. Should I fall in the space between what remains of me and this reckoning? I know I will never be alone. There was another in the fire, standing next to me. There was another in the waters, holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding how good you've been to me? There is a cross that bears the burden, where another died for me. There is another in the fire. All my debt left me dead beneath the waters. I'm no longer no other name but the name that is Jesus. He who was and still is and will be through it all. So come what may in the space between all the things unseen and his reckoning, I know I will never be alone. Yeah, I know I will never be alone. There'll be another in the fire standing next to me. There'll be another in the waters holding back the seas. Should I ever need reminding how good you've been to me, I'll count the joy from every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy from every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy from every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy from every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be. I'll count the joy from every battle, 'cause I know that's where you'll be.
So I will admit, the first part of the message is kind of tough because it deals with a lot of sad stuff. And that's sort of how the book of Ruth is. The beginning is hard. Naomi and Ruth deal with all kinds of hardship. But at some point, Naomi makes that switch we were talking about. She doesn't stay in that place where her pain is just going to be personal and pervasive and permanent. No, she starts to look around at how God has provided, and she starts to see how this painful situation could become a pivotal circumstance. But you got to keep reading the story to get to that. And let me tell you a little bit about how this story goes on. It's what I would call your basic rom-com plot line. So here's what happens. Girl steals from boy's garden. Boy thinks girl is cute. Boy says to girl, "You can steal from me anytime." Girl says, "Okay, I will." And that's where we get to. So Ruth goes and starts to gather in the field of Boaz, and at first his servants thinks that she is just robbing them, but he says, no, let her steal anytime. Let her gather anytime she wants to. And Ruth goes and tells Naomi about this guy Boaz who is letting her gather in his field, and a plan hatches in Naomi's mind. And what I would say is, if Naomi had just remained stuck in her despair, if she had her blinders on, like her pain and her despair and her affliction, God cursing her was just going to be a permanent part of her life, she may have never seen this. But she did, because she was looking around and she realized that God had put good things in her life. God had given her this providential relationship in Ruth. God had given her a home, and now God had given her what you might call a ministry, a way to help someone else. And we see it really start to come to fruition in chapter 3 of the book of Ruth. So I want to read this to you. It says, "One day, Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, said to Ruth, 'My daughter, should I not try to find you a home where you will be well provided for?'" If you just stop there and you look at how Naomi is not looking at herself and all that she has been through, but she's looking outside of herself, and she is seeing someone in need, and she's saying to Ruth, "I want to minister to you." Verse 2, she says, "Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours?" Now, I need to explain that idea of kinsman, because certainly it means someone related, but there was this law back in the Old Testament that they were operating by, and it was called the law of the kinsman redeemer. And essentially what it meant was this: if a man passed away, then his brother or his closest kinsman would get the opportunity to take in the widow and provide for her. She could become his wife. And I know that that seems so weird. And it is. It's odd. We would never say today that it's a great thing that if your husband dies, his brother gets first dibs. That's not how we operate. But back then, in those days, that provided hope for this widow. That gave her the chance to have a home and to have safety and security during that very, very difficult time. And so what Naomi is realizing is that perhaps there's potential here that Boaz, who is a kinsman of theirs, could actually take Ruth in. And so she says, "Is he not a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself. Put on your best clothes." And then go down to the threshing floor. This plan hatches in Naomi's mind. Now, you might think it funny that I call her personal ministry matchmaking, but that's what it is. And she is actually doing something very wise and very kind for Ruth. She is actually allowing providential relationships and personal ministry help to make her painful circumstance a pivotal one in her life and in Ruth's. If you've been tracking along with us as we've gone through this message series of 5 things that God uses to grow your faith, you know that providential relationships and personal ministry are a couple of things that we've talked about. And in this moment, you can see how they actually are working together to create a pivotal circumstance, something else that can be used to grow someone's faith. And I think it's worth noting that Naomi finds it in working with people. Letting people into your life is such a huge part of turning painful circumstances into pivotal ones that can strengthen your faith. Because when you let people into your lives, first of all, people can give you a reason to keep going. They can be people who give you a reason to get up each day, someone to serve, someone to help. People can also be a tremendous example to you. You never know the people who are in your life right now, maybe someone at work, maybe someone who sits on the pew next to you at church, maybe someone sitting with you right now watching this video. You never know what they've been through and what wisdom they might have for you in their lives. It's through people, through the relationships that God has provided Naomi, and then looking outside of her pain and taking on a way to serve someone, that she starts to turn this thing around. She starts to turn her life around. And it's really a beautiful story how it unfolds because her plan works. Boaz does end up marrying Ruth, and you start to see Naomi's life come full circle around because not only does Boaz marry Ruth, but they have a child together. And I want to read you a couple of lines from toward the end of the book at what happens. It says, "Then Naomi took that child born to Ruth and Boaz and laid him in her lap and cared for him. The women living there said, 'Look, now Naomi has a son.'" They even see how things have come full circle. And then it says this, "And they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." That's right, the guy who would be King David, the most influential king in the history of Israel. And Naomi has a huge part in that story. You might say she played a pivotal part in that story. And it's all because she let her painful situation become a pivotal circumstance. She saw God's faithfulness. She let it give her, in the words of James, Jesus' brother, that scripture we read earlier, perseverance. And that perseverance bring her faith to maturity. Don't you know that Naomi was someone people went to time and time again to ask for wisdom because of her mature, deep faith that came through a very difficult time in her life? And what's wild is how she finds her place, not just in the story of these people, not just in the story of David, but if you keep tracing David's family line down, you get to Jesus. You get to God in the flesh, walking among us. And you know what Jesus showed us time and time again? The same thing that Naomi experienced. That God comes to people in the midst of painful circumstances. Jesus entered them all the time. He entered into the circumstance of a man born blind, a woman sentenced to die, a father whose son was sick and close to death. Jesus even walked into a moment of his friend who had actually already passed away. And time again, Jesus displays that painful situations, yes, though they are allowed to come into our lives, they are not obstacles that we have to give into. They are not things that destroy our faith. They are actually things that can remind us of how powerful and how faithful God is. Jesus shows us through all of the stories that we've read of him as we've gone through this series together, that no matter what we face, even if it is death, the story is not over. And so I would say to you, no matter what you're dealing with today, now, in this moment, your story is not over. How will you look around and see God's continued faithfulness to you? How will you allow that very difficult circumstance to become something that doesn't destroy your faith, but actually provides perseverance in your faith, that brings your faith to maturity and strength? How will you hand it to God and see him work in your life and use that painful situation as a pivotal circumstance that grows your faith? As we've gone through this series together, we've been reminded time and time again that God wants to grow us deeper. I think about the world that we live in right now and all of the stuff that's going on, and what we need more than anything else, it's people of depth. People with a depth of faith. People who are turning to God, who are looking to God for wisdom, for practical teaching, for providential relationships. People who have private disciplines with God so that he continues to grow that faith. People who have personal ministry that they offer to God so that he continue to make them mature, loving, serving people. People who know that even difficult times like what we are going through right now in our world, even those things can become pivotal circumstances God uses to grow our faith. I hope you've enjoyed the series, but more than that, I hope you embrace the 5 things and you seek them out in your life, because God can use them to grow your faith.
May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and give you peace. In the name of Jesus, amen.